April 15th, 1943. 8,000 meters above the Belgian coastline, where the cold bites through leather and steel alike. The sky is a cathedral of ice-blue silence, broken only by the distant thunder of Pratt & Whitney engines clawing through thin air. Oberleutnant Klaus Hartmann banks his Focke-Wulf W190 into a lazy turn, his gloved hand steady on the stick, his breath fogging the cramped cockpit glass. Below him, the patchwork fields of occupied Europe stretch like a faded quilt. Above him, contrails streak white against the void, thin ribbons marking the passage of American bombers bleeding their way home from Germany, their formations ragged, their gunners low on ammunition, their pilots praying to see England one more time. Hartmann adjusts his oxygen mask and scans the horizon. He has flown 117 combat sorties. He has claimed 14 victories. His logbook is filled with the names of enemies reduced to wreckage, Spitfires, Hurricanes, P-38 Lightnings, each one a testament to German engineering, to the superiority of the Luftwaffe, to the discipline drilled into him at the fighter schools in Bavaria. Today, he expects another. Then he sees them. Blunt. Ungainly. Massive. A flight of 4 aircraft riding high escort, their silhouettes wrong, too wide, too heavy, their noses thick as barrels. They resemble nothing so much as flying oil drums with wings bolted on as an afterthought. Hartmann keys his radio. His voice crackles through the static, tinged with amusement. "Milk can," he says. "Milk jugs." The other pilots in his staffel laugh. One responds, "Die Amerikaner schicken uns Versuch mit Flügeln." The Americans are sending us barrels with wings. They do not know yet. None of them know that these blunt, ungraceful machines descending from the stratosphere carry something that will rewrite the rules of air combat over Europe. That inside each one sits a young man from Ohio or Texas or Brooklyn, hands wrapped around a control yoke connected to 4,000 horsepower and 8 Browning M2 machine guns, each one capable of firing 750 rounds per minute, each round half an inch in diameter, each burst a storm of lead that can saw a fighter plane in half. The P-47 Thunderbolt. The Jug. The flying fortress of fighter planes. And the Germans are about to learn what American abundance looks like when it comes hunting at 400 miles per hour. To understand how this moment came to be, one must step back 2 years earlier, to a time when the United States Army Air Forces faced a crisis of confidence and capability. In the spring of 1941, as Europe burned and the Luftwaffe ruled the skies from the Arctic Circle to the Mediterranean, American fighter doctrine was in disarray. The standard frontline fighter, the P-40 Warhawk, was outmatched by the Messerschmitt Bf-109. The P-39 Airacobra, despite its innovative design, struggled at high altitude where modern air combat was increasingly fought. The twin-engine P-38 Lightning showed promise but was complex, expensive, and suffered teething problems in the cold European theater. The Army Air Forces needed something new. Something brutal, something that could escort heavy bombers deep into the Reich, fight its way through swarms of German interceptors, and still have the fuel to make it home. Republic Aviation Corporation, a scrappy manufacturer based in Farmingdale, Long Island, answered the call with a design that seemed, on paper, absurd. The P-47 would be enormous, over 7 tons fully loaded, nearly twice the weight of a Spitfire. It would be powered by a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp radial engine producing 2,000 horsepower, fed by a turbo supercharger the size of a garbage can mounted in the rear fuselage. It would carry 8 50 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing, with 350 rounds per gun. Its fuel capacity would be staggering, 370 gallons internal, plus external drop tanks that could push its range to nearly 2,000 miles. It would be capable of diving faster than any fighter in existence, its massive airframe able to absorb punishment that would shred lighter aircraft. When the first prototype flew in May 1941, test pilots reported something unexpected. Despite its bulk, the P-47 was fast. Very fast. At altitude, it could exceed 430 miles per hour in level flight, matching or exceeding the best German and British fighters. Its climb rate was initially poor, but above 20,000 feet, where the turbo supercharger came fully online, it transformed into a rocket. Its roll rate was exceptional, better than anything else flying, and its dive performance was legendary. Point the nose down and the Jug would go wherever gravity and horsepower could take it, the airframe solid as a bank vault, the controls firm and responsive. But speed and strength meant nothing without armament, and here the Thunderbolt became something else entirely. 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns, not rifle caliber weapons like the British used, not even the single 20 memory cannon that armed some fighters. 8 heavy machine guns, synchronized to fire through the propeller arc, their combined rate of fire exceeding 100 rounds per second. When a P-47 pilot squeezed the trigger, the result was not gunfire, it was a chainsaw. A blizzard. An industrial shredder operating at supersonic speed. Each 50 caliber round weighed approximately 43 grams. Each one left the muzzle at 2,840 feet per second. Armor-piercing rounds could penetrate 23 millimeters of steel at 500 meters. Incendiary rounds ignited fuel tanks, hydraulic lines, ammunition stores. Tracer rounds marked the stream, every fifth bullet a burning arrow showing where the storm was going. To be caught in the cone of fire from a P-47 was to be caught in something closer to artillery than aerial combat. German pilots who survived the experience described it in their reports with words like buzzsaw, meat grinder, impossible volume of fire. But in early 1943, when the Thunderbolt first arrived in England with the 56th Fighter Group and the 78th Fighter Group, the Germans did not know this yet. They saw only the shape, the bulk, the apparent clumsiness, and they laughed. The men who flew the P-47 into combat came from a nation that had never known strategic bombing of its cities, had never seen its capital burn, had never watched its industry ground to rubble by enemy air power. They came from farms in Iowa and factories in Michigan and university campuses in California. They were, on average, 22 years old. Most had never been outside the United States before shipping out to England. They had trained on the Jug for a handful of weeks, enough to learn its quirks, its massive torque on takeoff that pulled the aircraft to the left unless corrected, its tendency to leak oil from a dozen different fittings, its cockpit so spacious a pilot could stand up inside if he wanted to. They were told the P-47 was tough. They were told it was fast. They were told it hit like a freight train. But they were also told it was heavy, that it couldn't turn with the nimble German fighters, that its rate of climb was poor at low altitude, that experienced Luftwaffe pilots would exploit these weaknesses without mercy. And for the first few months of 1943, it seemed the doubters were right. Early missions were brutal. The 56th Fighter Group flew its first combat sortie on April 8, 1943, a sweep over the Dutch coast. The pilots, still learning their aircraft, still learning the rhythms of combat in the European theater, encountered Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s flown by veterans with hundreds of hours of combat time. The Germans used their altitude advantage and superior low-altitude performance to bounce the American formations, diving out of the sun, firing quick bursts, then climbing away before the heavy Thunderbolts could respond. In the first weeks, the P-47 group suffered losses without inflicting significant damage in return. German intelligence reports from April and May 1943 reflected a confident dismissal. One Luftwaffe fighter wing commander wrote in his tactical assessment, "The new American fighter is heavily armed but slow to maneuver. It presents a large target and relies on straight-line speed rather than agility. Our pilots are advised to engage in turning combat where the enemy's weight disadvantage is most pronounced. The aircraft is more of a bomber escort than a true fighter, avoid head-on passes where its armament is concentrated, and attack from angles where its size makes it vulnerable." In the ready rooms and mess halls of Luftwaffe bases in France and Belgium, the dismissive nickname spread: Milchkan, milk jug, Donnerklotz, Thunderlog. Some pilots called it the Flieger Koloss, the flying colossus, a term mixing grudging respect for its size with contempt for its supposed lack of grace. But something was shifting, something the Germans could not see yet, hidden beneath the surface of early combat reports, buried in the details of after-action debriefs and engineering studies. The American pilots were learning, and the Thunderbolt, this massive, ungainly machine they had inherited, was beginning to reveal what it was truly capable of. May 17, 1943. The sky over Dunkirk. Second Lieutenant Robert Johnson, 22 years old, from Lawton, Oklahoma, is flying his 13th combat mission. His P-47, nicknamed All Hell, rides at 26,000 feet. The air so thin and cold that frost crystals form inside his oxygen mask. Below, the channel glitters like hammered pewter. Ahead, a formation of B-17 Flying Fortresses drones toward Germany, their contrails bleeding white across the sky. Johnson's radio crackles. Bandits. 9 o'clock low. He cranes his neck, scanning the sky, and then he sees them, a flight of W-190s, climbing hard, clawing for altitude, trying to position themselves for a slashing attack on the bombers. 4 of them, maybe 5. Gray-green camouflage against the darker earth below. Johnson does not hesitate. He rolls the Thunderbolt inverted, pulls the stick back, and dives. What happens next occurs in seconds, but those who study the gun camera footage and combat reports will debate the details for decades. The P-47 accelerates in the dive like a falling anvil, the airspeed indicator climbing past 400, past 450, the controls stiffening, the whole aircraft vibrating with barely contained energy. The German pilots see him coming. How could they miss something so large? But they misjudge his speed, his closure rate, the violence of his dive. Johnson opens fire at 600 yards. The 8 Brownings roar to life, the recoil shuddering through the airframe, the guns cycling so fast they sound like a continuous tearing scream. Tracers arc out, converging, a river of light that reaches across the sky and finds the trailing FW-190. The German fighter shudders, pieces flying off, smoke streaming, and then it flips inverted and spins away, trailing fire. Johnson pulls out of the dive, the G-forces crushing him into his seat, the horizon wheeling, and climbs back toward the bombers. 1 pass. 3 seconds of fire. 1 kill. The other German pilots scatter, diving away, abandoning their attack. This is not an isolated incident. Across the theater, American pilots are discovering what their aircraft can do when used correctly. The Thunderbolt cannot turn with a 190 or 109 in a flat scissors fight. It cannot climb with them from low altitude. But it can dive faster than anything in the sky. It can absorb damage that would cripple other fighters, pilots return to base with cylinders shot out, control surfaces shredded, wings perforated by cannon shells, and the jug keeps flying. And when a P-47 pilot gets his guns on target, the result is catastrophic. The Germans begin to notice. Combat reports from Luftwaffe units in June 1943 shift in tone. One fighter pilot, Unteroffizier Heinz Schmidt of JG-26, writes in his diary after a mission over the Ruhr, encountered the American Thunderbolt today. Do not believe what they say about it being slow or clumsy. I watched one dive on Lieutenant Fischer's 190, and the speed was unbelievable. It was on him before he could react. The aircraft exploded in midair. We were told to avoid combat below 20,000 feet with this fighter. I understand why now. Another report, this one from a German fighter wing headquarters to Luftwaffe High Command in July. American P-47 aircraft are demonstrating significantly improved combat effectiveness. Pilots are exploiting the aircraft's speed and firepower advantages. Recommend updated tactics emphasizing altitude advantage and avoidance of head-on engagements. The concentration of heavy machine gun fire is proving lethal to our fighters. By August 1943, the laughter has stopped. The transformation is not merely tactical, it is psychological. The German fighter pilots, who for 3 years have dominated the skies of Europe, who have grown accustomed to shooting down bombers with near impunity, who have regarded themselves as the elite warriors of the Luftwaffe, are encountering something they did not expect, an enemy with material. Advantages so overwhelming that skill alone cannot overcome them. The P-47 is the embodiment of American industrial might translated into aerial combat. Every aspect of its design reflects abundance. 8 guns where other nations' fighters carry 4 or 6. 350 rounds per gun where others carry 150. Fuel capacity sufficient to fly from England to Berlin and back. Armor plate protecting the pilot's seat, back, and sides, protection so comprehensive that P-47 pilots have among the highest survival rates of any fighter in the war. When a Thunderbolt takes battle damage, there is redundancy. 2 magnetos per engine, dual hydraulic systems, self-sealing fuel tanks that can absorb multiple hits without catching fire. This abundance is alien to German pilots flying fighters with barely enough fuel for one combat engagement, with ammunition loads that force them to ration their shots, with engines running on synthetic fuel of dubious quality because the Pleiadi oil fields are being bombed around the clock. One Luftwaffe ace, speaking after the war, described the psychological impact. You could feel it when the Americans arrived. Not just the numbers, though there were always numbers, but the sense that they had everything. Fuel. Ammunition. Aircraft. We were counting our bullets. They were not. The .50 caliber machine gun becomes, in this context, more than a weapon. It becomes a symbol. Each round represents industrial capacity, the ability to manufacture billions of rounds of ammunition, to transport them across the Atlantic. to distribute them to dozens of fighter groups, to fire them in such quantities that pilots are instructed to test fire their guns every mission to ensure they're functioning properly. German pilots, by mid-1943, are often restricted to 2 or 3 seconds of fire per engagement to conserve ammunition. American pilots are briefed to fire in bursts, lasting 1 to 2 seconds. But they can do this dozens of times per mission, and if they run low, there are more bullets waiting when they land. One P-47 pilot, Captain Gerald Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group, described the experience in a letter home. "You pull the trigger, and the airplane shudders like a truck hitting a pothole. The noise is incredible, even through the helmet. The tracers go out and they just keep going, a solid stream, and where they hit things come apart. I saw a 109 take a burst square in the engine cowling, and the whole front of the airplane just disintegrated. Pieces everywhere. I don't think the pilot even had time to understand what happened. The German pilots understand. And increasingly, they fear it." October 8th, 1943. Mission 115. A strike against the Focke-Wulf aircraft factory at Marienburg, deep in East Prussia. The 56th Fighter Group flies top cover for the bomber stream, their P-47s strung out across 20 miles of sky, weaving back and forth to maintain station with the slower B-17s. At 27,000 feet, the world is pure geometry, sharp horizons, crystalline air, contrails sketching white equations across the void. Then the Germans come. They come in swarms. Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s, some from the west, some diving from above, some climbing from below, where they've been waiting, throttled back, hugging the deck to avoid radar. 30 fighters. 40. 50. The radio explodes with calls. Bandits. 11 o'clock high. Break right. Break right. I'm hit. I'm hit. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin, leading a flight of 4 Thunderbolts, sees a gaggle of 190s setting up for a beam attack on the bombers. He calls the bounce and rolls in, his wingmen following. The 4 P-47s diving in a loose line abreast formation. The closure rate is insane. His airspeed climbs past 500 miles per hour. The airframe buffeting, the controls heavy as iron. He picks a target. A lone 190 pulling lead on a B-17, the German pilot focused entirely on his prey, unaware of the avalanche descending behind him. Mahurin corrects his aim, walking the rudder to put the gunsight pipper on the 190's fuselage, and squeezes the trigger. 8 guns. 100 rounds per second. The P-47 bucks, slows, the recoil like an anchor dragging through the sky. The tracers reach out, converge, and the Focke-Wulf comes apart. Not gradually, not smoking, not trailing fire, but instantly, explosively, the wing root separating from the fuselage, the canopy shattering, debris streaming back like confetti. Mahurin pulls up hard, the G-forces graying his vision, and climbs back into the fight. He is not alone. All across the sky, Thunderbolts are diving, firing, climbing away. The Germans try to respond, but the dynamics have shifted. At high altitude, the P-47s are faster in a dive, faster in level flight, and their firepower makes any head-on engagement suicidal. The German pilots who survive later describe it as less like air combat and more like being hunted. The Thunderbolts appearing from above, making one high-speed pass, vanishing before a response is possible, then returning for another. By the time the bomber stream reaches Marienburg, the German interceptors have been scattered, their formations broken, their attacks disrupted. The 56th Fighter Group claims 14 kills for the loss of 2 aircraft. One of those losses is a P-47 that collides with a 190 mid-air and still manages to fly 70 miles back to the coast before the pilot bails out. The other is brought down by flak. The pilot belly lands in occupied Poland and evades capture for 3 days before being taken prisoner. The Germans file their reports. The assessments grow bleaker. One Luftwaffe fighter wing commander writes, "The American Thunderbolt is no longer an experimental aircraft or a novelty. It is now the dominant fighter over the Reich, capable of escorting bombers to any target within Germany, and our pilots are increasingly reluctant to engage when superior altitude and numbers are not assured. Morale is suffering." Winter 1943. Snow covers the airfields of East Anglia like a shroud. The days are short, the mission's brutal. The 8th Air Force pushes deeper into Germany, striking ball-bearing plants, oil refineries, aircraft factories. The attrition rate for bomber crews is staggering. Some groups lose half their aircraft on single missions. But the P-47s keep flying, keep fighting, and the kill ratios continue to climb. By December, the 56 Fighter Group alone has claimed over 200 enemy aircraft destroyed. The top aces, Mahurin, Johnson, Francis Gabby Gabreski, are becoming legends. Their gun camera footage is studied, their tactics analyzed and disseminated to other groups. The doctrine evolves. Use altitude, use speed, strike hard, break away, climb back, repeat. The Thunderbolt is not a dogfighter. It is a slashing predator, a hammer falling from the sky, a demonstration of kinetic energy and overwhelming firepower applied with precision and violence. The Germans adapt, they have no choice. They concentrate their fighters, attack in larger formations, try to draw the American escorts away from the bombers before committing to an attack. But the numbers are against them. By early 1944, the 8th Air Force is fielding hundreds of P-47s, soon to be joined by P-51 Mustangs that can reach even deeper into Germany. The Luftwaffe, bleeding pilots and aircraft it cannot replace, increasingly fights a defensive war, reacting rather than dictating terms. There is a moment, impossible to pin to a specific date, but visible in the aggregate of reports and records, when the psychological balance tips irrevocably. When German pilots stop seeing the P-47 as a curious oddity and start seeing it as an omen. The appearance of Thunderbolts means the bombers are coming. It means the sky will fill with lead. It means the odds of surviving the day's mission have just dropped. One captured Luftwaffe pilot, interrogated in England in March 1944, is asked about his experience fighting American fighters. He pauses, choosing his words carefully, then says, "The Thunderbolt does not fly like our fighters. It does not need to. It simply arrives. You see it, you try to position for an attack, and then it is on you, and the air is full of bullets, and there is nothing to do but dive away and hope." We were told it was clumsy. It is not clumsy. It is inevitable. The 8 machine guns, the symbol at the heart of this story, represent something larger than firepower. They represent a philosophy of warfare rooted in material supremacy. The United States, protected by 2 oceans, blessed with vast resources, unbombed and untouched by the devastation consuming Europe, could afford to build fighters that weighed 7 tons and carried 8 guns and burned fuel at rates that would bankrupt other nations. It could afford to train pilots in a pipeline that produced thousands of capable aviators per year, to lose aircraft by the hundreds and replace them within weeks, to fire ammunition in quantities that made European powers wince. This abundance was not accidental. It was the result of deliberate choices, economic systems that prioritized production, logistics networks that spanned continents, industrial capacity built over decades of peace. The P-47 was, in this sense, a weapon that could only have been built by America. Not because other nations lacked the engineering skill, the Germans were producing jet fighters by 1944. The British had pioneered radar and jet engines. But because other nations could not afford the waste, the redundancy, the sheer overwhelming excess baked into every system. And that excess, translated into combat, was lethal. The 50 caliber rounds that poured from a P-47's wings during a firing pass were not merely bullets. They were messages. Each one said, "We have more." More steel, more powder, more capacity to produce and deliver death than you can imagine. Each tracer that arced across the sky was a reminder that the American pilot could afford to miss, could afford to test his guns, could afford to fire at long range just to keep an enemy's head down, because there were more bullets waiting back at base, and more bullets in the factories, and more. Factories being built. The Germans, by contrast, were running out of fuel, out of pilots, out of time. Their aces, the men with 50, 70, 100 kills, were flying missions every day, sometimes multiple missions, because there was no one else. Their fighters were being built by slave labor in underground factories, fueled by synthetic gasoline that fouled engines and reduced performance, armed with ammunition increasingly adulterated with lower quality components. The mathematics of attrition were inescapable. One German pilot, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, described the shift in a post-war interview. In 1941, we were the hunters. In 1942, we were still confident. By 1943, we were prey. You could see it in the faces of new pilots. They were afraid before they ever flew a mission. They knew the Americans would come, wave after wave, and that no matter how many we shot down, there would be more the next day. The Thunderbolt, we stopped joking about it. You respected it, or you died. April 1944. The air offensive against Germany reaches a crescendo. Operation Argument, Big Week, sees massive raids targeting the German aircraft industry. The Luftwaffe rises to defend, throwing everything it has into the sky. The battles are apocalyptic. Hundreds of fighters swirling above bomber formations, contrails tangling, aircraft falling like burning rain. The P-47 groups are in the thick of it. The 56th, the 78th, the 353rd, the 4th, Thunderbolts everywhere, diving, climbing, firing, the sky stitched with tracers. The gun camera footage from these missions is almost surreal. German fighters exploding mid-air, wings shearing off, pilots bailing out, parachutes blossoming like pale flowers against the smoke. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, by now one of the leading American aces, describes a mission on February 22nd. We caught a formation of 109s trying to assemble for an attack. Jumped them from above, classic bounce. I fired on one from maybe 300 yards, saw my hits walking up the fuselage, and the whole tail just came off. The airplane tumbled, pilot didn't get out. Swung onto another one, fired again, engine started smoking, he rolled over and went down. All in maybe 30 seconds. That's what the jug could do when you set it up right. 30 seconds. Two kills, 1,600 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition expended. The mathematics of violence. By the spring of 1944, the P-47 has evolved beyond its early reputation. Drop tanks extend its range to over 800 miles, allowing it to escort bombers deep into southern Germany. Dive bombing modifications turn it into a devastating ground attack platform. Thunderbolts strafe locomotives, trucks, tanks, airfields, anything that moves or supports the German war machine. The transition is seamless, high-altitude escort one day, low-level ground attack the next. The same aircraft, the same guns, the same overwhelming firepower applied to different targets. The Luftwaffe is dying. Not from a single blow, but from cumulative attrition, from the slow grinding erosion of capacity and will. By D-Day in June 1944, Allied air superiority over Western Europe is absolute. The Thunderbolt is not solely responsible for this. Mustangs, Lightnings, Spitfires, and tactical bombers all contribute, but the Jug's role is undeniable. It was there first, flying the deep penetration missions when no other fighter could, absorbing losses, learning, adapting, and ultimately dominating. German production records from 1944 show a desperate attempt to keep pace. More fighters built than ever before, new models rushed into service, jet aircraft developed as a last gambit. But production means nothing without pilots, and the Luftwaffe's training pipeline has collapsed. New pilots arrive at frontline units with 50 hours of flight time, barely enough to take off and land safely, let alone fight experienced American pilots in superior aircraft. They die in droves. One German fighter commander, Johannes Steinhoff, writes in his memoir, by mid-1944, sending a new pilot into combat against the Americans was murder. They had no chance. The Americans had everything. Numbers, experience, fuel, ammunition. We had courage and desperation. It was not enough. August 7th, 1944. Somewhere over France. The Wehrmacht is in full retreat from Normandy, the Allied breakout at St. El having shattered the German defensive line. The roads are choked with retreating columns, trucks, horse-drawn carts, tanks, infantry divisions streaming east toward the Seine, toward the next defensive line, toward Germany. And then the Thunderbolts come. They come in waves. Flights of 4, 8, 12 aircraft laden with bombs and rockets, their .50 caliber guns loaded with armor-piercing and incendiary rounds. They circle the killing zones, the roads, the bridges, the choke points where the German columns cannot disperse, and they dive. From the ground, the sound is distinctive, the roar of a radial engine in a dive, building to a howl, then the ripsaw scream of the guns, the crump of rockets, the explosions. From the cockpit, the view is clinical, a road packed with vehicles, the gunsight pipper tracking along the column, the trigger pressed, the bullets walking through metal and flesh, trucks erupting in flames, men scattering, the aircraft pulling up and wheeling around for another pass. It is not glorious. It is industrial slaughter, mechanized murder on a scale that aerial combat cannot match. The P-47 pilots, many of whom enlisted to be Knights of the Air, to engage in honorable duels with enemy fighters, find themselves instead performing grim work, the destruction of an army in retreat, the annihilation of supply lines, the systematic elimination of anything that moves. But it is effective. The Wehrmacht's ability to move, to supply its forces, to conduct organized retreat is shattered by Allied air power. And the Thunderbolt, with its speed, its armament, its durability, is one of the primary instruments of this devastation. The German soldiers on the receiving end have their own name for it now. Jabos. Fighter bombers, but specifically, when they see the thick silhouette, the big radial engine, the 8-gun nose, they know. They dive for ditches, abandon vehicles, run for the trees. Some survive. Many do not. The war ends. May 8th, 1945. The last P-47 combat mission in Europe is flown on May 7th, a sweep over Czechoslovakia. The final tally, P-47 Thunderbolts of the 8th and 9th Air Forces are credited with 3,752 enemy aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat. Thousands more are destroyed on the ground. More than 15,000 Thunderbolts are built. They serve in every theater, Europe, the Pacific, the Mediterranean, China, Burma, India. They become legends. After the war, captured Luftwaffe pilots are interviewed extensively. Intelligence officers want to know what worked, what didn't, what did you fear? The answers vary, but certain themes recur. The Focke-Wulf 190 was respected as a superb fighter. The Spitfire was admired for its agility. The P-51 Mustang was feared for its range and performance. But the P-47 was something else. One former German ace, speaking in 1947, puts it simply. The Thunderbolt was America. You could not escape it. You could not outlast it. You could not match its firepower. It was big, it was everywhere, and it kept coming. And those 8 guns, Gott im Himmel, if you were caught in that fire, there was nothing left. Nothing but pieces. Another pilot, younger, shot down 3 times and wounded twice before the war's end, is more poetic. We laughed at it when it first appeared. We called it names. But it taught us something. It taught us that grace and beauty in an aircraft are luxuries. The Thunderbolt was not beautiful, but it was real. It was heavy and brutal, and it represented something we could not match. Endless capacity. Endless bullets. Endless pilots. Endless airplanes. We were fighting a war of attrition, and they had more to attrit. In the decades since, the P-47 Thunderbolt has faded somewhat from popular memory. It lacks the sleek lines of the Mustang, the iconic status of the Spitfire, the dramatic appearance of the Corsair. But those who study the air war over Europe, who examine the statistics and the mission reports and the combat records, understand what it represented. The Thunderbolt was a bridge between the pre-war notion of fighters as light, nimble dogfighters and the post-war reality of fighters as weapons platforms. Fast, heavily armed, capable of multiple roles, survivable. It was proof that firepower and protection could outweigh agility, that technological and industrial advantages could compensate for tactical disadvantages, that abundance was its own form of strategy. The 850 caliber machine guns, the centerpiece of the Jug's lethality, became a standard. Post-war American fighters retained them, the F-86 Sabre, the F-84 Thunderjet. Even as cannon armament improved, even as missiles replaced guns as the primary air-to-air weapon, the lesson of the P-47 remained: overwhelming firepower, applied with precision, wins fights. And there is a deeper lesson, one that resonates beyond aviation, beyond military history. The Thunderbolt succeeded because it was unapologetically what it was. It did not try to be a Spitfire. It did not try to mimic German design philosophy. It was built to American strengths, mass production, material abundance, long-range operations, firepower, and it exploited those strengths ruthlessly. The German pilots who laughed at it in 1943 learned this the hard way. They learned that war is not only about elegance or tradition or superior skill. It is also about capacity, about who can build more, sustain more, endure more. The P-47, ungainly and brutal and effective, was a manifestation of that truth. There is a recording, held in the archives of the Air Force Historical Research Agency, of an interview conducted in 1979 with Colonel Hub Zemke, one of the great P-47 leaders. He commanded the 56th Fighter Group, the Wolfpack, through the darkest days of 1943 and into the triumphs of 1944. He is asked, late in the interview, what he remembers most about the Thunderbolt. He pauses. You can hear it in the tape. The silence stretching out. Then he says, the sound. I remember the sound of 850s firing. Like tearing canvas, but louder. Deeper. You felt it in your chest.
And I remember thinking, the first time I heard it in combat, the first time I saw what it did to a German fighter, I thought, this is what we brought to Europe. not just an airplane, a message. We can do this all day, every day, for as long as it takes. And you cannot. The tape clicks off somewhere over Belgium, April 1943.
Oberleutnant Klaus Hartmann, who called the P-47 a milk jug, who laughed at its ungainly shape, banks his Focke-Wulf into a climb. He has just watched his wingman die, cut apart by a stream of fire so dense it seemed like a solid thing. He climbs, scanning the sky, and he sees them above, 4 Thunderbolts, circling, waiting. He knows now. They all know. The war will not be won by grace or elegance or 1,000 years of martial tradition. It will be won by the side that can put more guns in the sky, more bullets in those guns, more fuel in the tanks, more pilots in the cockpits, day after day, week after week, until the other side has nothing left to give. Hartmann turns east, toward home, and does not look back. Behind him, the Thunderbolts continue their patrol. Patient. Relentless. Inevitable. 8 guns. America's answer. The laughter is over. 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 The laughter is over.